Hi, I'm Ryan McDonald. Welcome to the Point Sports Report. This is a college football Week 3 preview show. I'm joined by Michael and Marcus. How you guys doing?
Doing good. How are you doing?
Doing pretty well. So we went through last weekend. It was kind of a little bit more of a boring of a weekend. Not too many of those major upsets in the top 25 rankings. We did kind of get rid of some of those undefeated teams. We have, I think, 50 undefeated teams left, and we're guaranteed to get rid of 6 more this week due to undefeated matchups. And maybe there'll be some more upsets in there to kind of whittle down that to that top 20, that top undefeated rankings. But Marcus, let's start with you. What's your take from last weekend?
You know, there are a couple of teams that struggled mightily against weak teams, and we saw this reflected in all of the rankings, whether it be the official AP or coaches ranking or our own To The Point Sports ranking. Clemson beating Troy by 6 points at home. That was a big disappointment, I think, to many, because many people had Clemson number 2 and, receiving number 1 votes as well, and then beating a smaller, weaker team by only 6 at home is devastating. Then you look at Georgia beating Nicholls State by 2 at home. An FCS team in their first game playing at Georgia almost pulled off that huge upset against number 9 Georgia. Again, we saw it reflected in the polls. They dropped, rightfully so. It just makes me. It made me realize that the division between Power 5 conferences and Group of 5 and even some FCS teams might be a little bit more blurred than we would expect. I think, maybe a couple years down the road, either that line's going to be completely gone, or it'll start to have a bigger division, and we'll really understand why there's a Power 5 and Group of 5, whereas right now it doesn't seem super strong. Obviously, you got many Power 5 teams just blowing out Group of 5 teams and FCS teams, but the fact that there are each week a decent amount of non-Power 5 teams winning against Power 5 teams, it makes me, question how long that division is going to last and be, a relevant division.
That's a good point. There, as you guys have heard us say many times and probably getting sick, parity is a big word we've used this year. The difference between some of the top teams in the bottom of FBS and then now the FCS, we've seen more FCS beating FBS this year than we have in the previous year in the first couple weeks. And who knows, maybe even a couple more this next week as I look at the schedule. There's some of these FCS teams that could come in and beat an FBS, but the difference between the top teams in the middle tier and the lower tier are just is much closer. Michael, what about you?
I'm going to have to agree with Marcus. I thought Clemson I would say it's quite honestly kind of embarrassing. They were even fortunate on a goal line. The refs called the play before the fumble, I guess, came out, but there was a good chance that Troy even could have won that game. So I did move them down in the slot. They're still number 3 in my rankings just based on talent alone, but it's so hard. These rankings are so difficult each week. Some teams have tested themselves. Other teams, you're not exactly sure if they tested themselves. Clemson had a very difficult road win against Auburn, but, do we know much about Auburn? The quality of victories, this early on in the season, it's very hard to know them until the season actually plays out. So I guess my takeaway, or if I had one word, is just inflated. The rankings really, really feel inflated. I'm not exactly sure who's good and who's not, but we've got some very juicy matchups in Week 3 that I'm really excited about, and I think will really shape our future rankings.
And Michael, you're not a fan of it, and Marcus, I believe you're not either. We do it for the fans. We do it because everyone likes it and they want to see. But preseason and early season rankings, you guys aren't a fan of. We don't have a lot of information. We don't know what these teams are. We're kind of going off of last year and what we think they might be in the end instead of what they've done on the field. Is that right?
There's only so much that you can do. You can look at, last year they're extremely good. Clemson losing the championship to Alabama. That makes them the number 2 team. They recruited a couple of decent players and they didn't lose, a crazy amount of players. Obviously, I'm speaking hypotheticals, but Clemson was number 2. But then you come into this season, it's completely different. Even just replacing one guy, it changes that whole, how the team works together. And so there's only so much that you can guesstimate from all these different factors to be able to say, hey, this is definitely the number 3 team. It's hard to do, and that's why preseason polls are always so wacky. Ryan, I've talked with you about this before. I feel that the rankings shouldn't necessarily be specifically ordered 1 through 25, but maybe these are the top 10 teams in the country. These are the next 10. These are the next 10. That way you still get an idea of who should be good versus who might not be as good, but you're not putting a specific number to them, especially because, Clemson being number 2 at the beginning of the season, number 1 in some polls, they're not going to move super far down, and as they win, they're going to move up quickly. And so because of that preseason rank, even with a loss or a close win like they just had, they're going to find a way back into the top 4 easily if, as long as they perform well based on their preseason rankings. Whereas you get teams like San Diego State or Utah started outside of the top 25, they got to fight really hard to get ranked higher and higher. And it's more and more difficult to, breach the top 20, top 15, top 10, and so on. So, no, I'm not a huge fan of the preseason polls. I understand why they do it. Like you said, the fans want to see. I think they should just do it a little bit differently.
With that being said, Michael, do you kind of want to talk a little bit about maybe 2 of your most underrated teams in the top 25 or maybe even outside the top 25?
Yeah, I'd like to give some teams a little bit of credit for challenging themselves early on. Notre Dame is currently ranked 18 in the AP and coaches poll, and that's actually where I have them simply based on other teams being undefeated, and I know that they have a big game this weekend, so I'm willing to move them up actually pretty significantly if they beat Michigan State. But yeah, I think Notre Dame is a team that's extremely dangerous. They have their quarterback for the future, and I expect them to do big things this year, and I'm very excited about the potential with Deshaun Kaiser there. So they're definitely one of my teams to look out for.
Yeah, I'd like to say that Texas is underrated. I know they have had a weak couple of seasons. Last year they weren't great, but they did show well against Oklahoma. They started the season off beating Notre Dame, which, Michael, you said that was your underrated team.
Yes.
And so if Notre Dame is really that great, does that mean Texas is that much greater? I think that this year is going to be Texas's year. Not necessarily saying they're going to win the Big 12 or, necessarily even make a New Year's Six bowl. But I definitely think that, they're going to be great this season and get their name back to what it was. AP poll, they're number 11. Again, we've said our feelings on the AP poll in the past. And the coaches are number 16. So I think at least in the coaches poll, they are underrated. I think they should be higher. I believe I put them much higher in my votes. And in our website's poll, they are number 12. So I do believe that Texas is one of the underrated teams that are currently in the top 25. Outside of the top 25, it gets a little tricky, so I'm not going to go there because I think that gets strongly into opinions, and like we said, early season polls aren't that great, and so it's hard to look just outside of the top 25 and be like, oh yeah, this team should be in there. So I'm going to go with Texas.
As I look at my top 25, a team that I think is underrated in others is Iowa, 11-13. This is an Iowa team that went undefeated last year. Came within one play, pretty much, of playing in the college football playoff. Instead, they went and played Stanford, and they did get destroyed. So I'll give it that to Stanford there. But who knows how Iowa was feeling, if they felt like they deserved to be in the college football playoff or whatnot. But Iowa came in, won last week playing Iowa State. Some people had questions, and they blew them out of the water, 49-3. I'm interested in to see what this Iowa team does, and I think that this is a top 10 Iowa team, and they are outside of the top 10. Another one that's not in the top 25, and I'll go there where you guys wouldn't, is Nebraska. Nebraska is 2-0. And they had 2 big wins already, 43-10 and 52-17. Now, I will say it's against lesser opponents, Fresno State and Wyoming, but those are still two very, very decent wins, very, very large margin. The other thing is Nebraska last year lost 7 games, but they lost 7 games by a combined 31 points, which is 4.4 average. 5 of those games were by a combined 13 points. So they lost by 1 game by 10, 1 game by 8, and the rest were by a combined 13 points. They just couldn't finish. And I think that Nebraska is going to be able to fix that this year, and this is going to be a really, really good Nebraska team. We'll talk more about Nebraska in a minute, but if there's anything else you guys want to throw in there before we go into the picks of the week.
Yeah, I just wanted to point out that, their very first loss was on a extremely lucky Hail Mary against BYU at home with BYU's freshman quarterback fresh off of a LDS mission, literally 2 or 3 months. Luck was completely on BYU's side, and that, I think that hurt Nebraska early. Their spirits were low because of that. And I remember there was something that happened. I think a Nebraska player got injured, and so there's an extra timeout that BYU shouldn't have had and gave them enough time. So there's just a lot of luck going towards BYU, giving Nebraska their first loss, and I think that was heartbreaking, and it hurt them for the rest of the season. So, I'll give you that. Nebraska, I think, should be higher. I think last season was unlucky, and they're showing really well so far. So they play Oregon this week. I wouldn't be surprised to see them jump into the top 20 if they win.
Starting out the week 3 picks now, we are going to start off with USC and Stanford. This game is being played at Stanford. The line is 8.5 points. Michael, how about you start us off with a little quick preview?
Yeah, this is a game. This is, for those who are in the Bay Area, I've got a cousin who went to Stanford, and this is a very, very big deal to folks in California. This is as close to a rivalry between Stanford and Cal as you can get. So USC at Stanford is going to be a huge game. As Ryan mentioned, it's an 8.5 point spread, Stanford being the favored team. I really believe that USC is going to cover the spread. I expect Stanford to win. I'm going to pick them to win. But I think this is a very close game. USC is super athletic. Just because they don't have a top 25 ranking does not mean that they don't have superior athletes. They're always going to get them in LA. And I really believe that USC is going to push Stanford really, really hard. I think McCaffrey is going to be too much for Stanford in this game for USC, and ultimately I believe Stanford will win, but I think USC is going to cover. I think this is going to be a very, very close game.
USC looked really good last week against Utah State, and Stanford didn't look very good in their first game, but Stanford had a bye week to prepare for this, which I think gives them the benefit, the nod to Stanford. We're going to jump over to another game. Marcus, you wanted to hit quickly North Dakota State and Iowa.
Yeah, North Dakota State, I believe they're on a 5-year championship run in the FCS. And yes, it's a lower division of, college football, but they've been completely dominant the last 5 years. Yes, they lost their star quarterback to the NFL draft. He was the number 2 pick. I believe he went to the Eagles, Carson Wentz. And it's hard to replace him. But a couple years ago, they replaced their head coach, and they thought they were going to struggle, but then they won 2 more. They have been known to beat whichever FBS team they're playing in whichever given season. Iowa, I think they're good. I think they're great. I think they should have been in the playoffs last year, got blown out by Stanford, like Ryan said earlier. But, North Dakota State, you never know. I kind of want to pick this as my upset for the week. It's hard to make that as my upset. But I think this is actually going to be a fun, entertaining game to watch. Iowa could completely destroy them and it'll be boring. But North Dakota State has beaten FBS teams, and it could happen again.
Yeah, I'll take Iowa in this one, 38-17, 38-23. Maybe keeping it a little closer than people like, but still take Iowa. Marcus, you wanted to hit up another Houston and Cincinnati. How would you take us there?
This is a in-conference matchup, the American Athletic Conference. Cincinnati has been on and off decent over the last couple of years. Houston's had a very dominant last couple of years as well. I would not be surprised to see Cincinnati actually pull up an upset on this one. Houston is great. They could be one of the best teams in the country. It's hard to judge because of what they've played so far. Yes, they beat Oklahoma, but how good is Oklahoma? I wouldn't be surprised to see Cincinnati pull this one off, but it's hard to play against Houston. What Cincinnati does have going for them is it's in Cincinnati, but it's going to be hard to stop Greg Ward Jr. He just is a phenomenal athlete. If they can slow him down, I do believe that they have a shot at winning this game.
Yeah, Greg Ward Jr. Sustained an injury to his right throwing shoulder in their win over Oklahoma in the season opener. They were kind of cautious. He had an MRI. He was held out of last Saturday's win over an FCS team. But Sunday night he was cleared, or he participated in practice, and he was cleared to play Thursday night against Cincinnati.
Well, just the simple fact that they were without Greg Ward Jr. last week against, I know it's Lamar and they're an FCS team, but they did beat them 42-0. I really believe that Houston has NFL talent, and all Houston has been hearing lately is that they don't deserve to be ranked as high as they are. I think they're going to come out really strong. Houston's currently favored by 7.5 points. I actually am going to pick them to win by 2 touchdowns. I think it's going to be a statement game for Houston. And ultimately, I think it'll set up the rest of their season and ultimately set up a big game against Louisville at the end of the year.
That will be a big game at the end of the year. Speaking of Louisville is playing at home against Florida State. This is a game I'm really intrigued about, really looking forward to. I don't want to say too much on this just because I'm going to let it play out on the field. I could see either team winning this game. It's going to probably come down to turnovers and defense, who makes more mistakes. I want to say Louisville. I'm afraid it'll be Florida State. So this is just a tough one to pick. Michael?
Yeah, Lamar Jackson for Louisville, again, continuing his Heisman campaign, has just been a freak on the football field. If Florida State can stop him, they'll win the game. I know that sounds pretty basic and simple, but I think that is the case. And I do believe Florida State is going to win by double digits. I think this is going to be a statement game for Florida State. I know it's on the road. Florida State is favored by 2. But I do believe this, similar to the Houston matchup, I think this is going to be a statement victory for Florida State. Look, the first half against Ole Miss, Florida State was getting pushed around, but they came back in the second half. They controlled the line of scrimmage, and I really believe that because Louisville hasn't faced stiff competition early, that Florida State's going to take control of this game early. And it'll be too much, or it'll be too little too late for Louisville. And again, believe that Florida State will win by double digits.
Marcus, we're going to move on to another game. This is possibly the third year in a row. Bama is playing Ole Miss at Ole Miss. Will Ole Miss make it 3 wins in a row?
I believe that they will. I know it's a rough game to pick. Ole Miss has been hit or miss. They've had good seasons the last couple of years, but they haven't been able to close out. I believe 2 years ago, they breached the top 4 at one point. That was crazy to me to see Ole Miss up there when they're in a division with Alabama and LSU and Auburn. Their quarterback, Chad Kelly, he's a phenomenal player, and he's somehow put together a formula to beat Alabama the last 2 years. Ole Miss had a loss against Florida State last week, and I think they're going to bounce back from that. Alabama hasn't seemed to have too difficult of a journey thus far, and I think Ole Miss is going to be a very tough matchup for them. Like you said, Ole Miss has won the last 2, but they've played 60 games or so against each other, and Alabama has won 80% of those. And so, Alabama, they're strong historically against Ole Miss and just in general. But Ole Miss has the upper hand in the last 2 years, and I hope that they can pull this one off and stir up the college football world in week 3 already by a number 1 team losing. I think that would be phenomenal and it'll create a lot of fun for the season so early on.
So Alabama's favored by 10.5. I think that they're going to win this game, but I do think that Ole Miss is going to cover. One thing to keep in mind: Chad Kelly gets the ball out of his hands super quickly, and against an Alabama defense that's as big and as strong as any team in the country, I really think that this has been a key for Ole Miss in beating Alabama in the past. Spread offenses in college football really equalize the playing field, and Ole Miss does a great job of doing that. I just think that given Lane Kiffin's dressing down from Nick Saban last week, I really think Alabama's going to be prepared to play and win this game. Nick Saban's not going to lose 3 in a row, and I think there are a lot of people saying that he wouldn't lose 2 in a row last year, but I really think that they're going to have a statement victory, although I do believe that Ole Miss will cover the 10.5 points.
It's a really good point. I didn't even think about how they will respond after that lashing from Saban after last week. That being said, I haven't been too impressed with Alabama. Now you're going to say, what? They destroyed USC. Yeah, but USC hung in that game for a lot until mistakes took over, a younger quarterback and just not being able to be explosive. Now you can credit that to Alabama's defense, but at the same time, I just haven't seen anything that makes me just go, that is the best team. I have them number one. I just want to see more from them, and this is the game that's going to do it. Ole Miss has already been tested. They've been through a battle with Florida State, and coming into this, I think they have better preparation of who they've played. It's going to come down to turnovers again. Obviously, most games do, but Chad Kelly has to make smart decisions and to just be accurate with the football. If he can do that and handle the pressure that Alabama is going to bring, and just respond to their blows and kind of make this a boxing match, I think Ole Miss could win this game, especially because it's at home.
Ole Miss does benefit from a bye week as well to prepare for Alabama.
That's a great point. We're going to move on to Oregon and Nebraska. This is one of those kind of off-the-radar games. As I was saying earlier, Nebraska's not ranked. They're 2-0. They've had 2 really big wins, but they kind of responded late last week and scored a lot of points late in the game to make that a big win. But still, they were able to score. Oregon hasn't looked very good, in my opinion, struggled against an FCS team and then beat Virginia by about 20 points, but they let Virginia score a lot of points. This game is at Nebraska, which is a tough place to play. Marcus, you're an Oregon guy, so what are your thoughts here?
I believe
that we will win.
No, I think Oregon might be overrated. I think it's too early to tell if they are, but they're not the Oregon that they were 2 years ago or maybe even last year. I mean, they beat UC Davis 53-28. And to me, when I see Oregon's name in front of that, it makes me think that it should have been more like 60-something to less than 20. Against Virginia, Virginia isn't super strong. New coach, Bronco Mendenhall from BYU. They lost to Richmond, FCS team, in their first game, and then, had a great challenge against Oregon, and still, it was 44-26. Again, that's not your typical Oregon. I think they're overrated, but I don't think they should be much lower than they are. And as Ryan mentioned earlier, Nebraska is underrated. So I think these two teams, as we're looking at them, are probably, on equal playing fields right now. So because it's at Nebraska, I got to give it to Nebraska, even though, I love the Oregon Ducks, mostly because of their jersey and their field. Ever since I was 12 years old, I loved watching their games because of their color scheme, their field. So I grew up, to be an Oregon Ducks fan until Boise State beat them twice. Then I, had to switch to the home team. But I got to go with Nebraska on this one, as much as it hurts me to say that.
All those things add up to only one thing that you said. This is going to be a great game.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Regardless of who wins, this should be a really, really fun game to watch. Michael, do you have anything to add here?
Yeah, this is kind of the quasi-civil war again. You've got Mark Helfrich at Oregon facing Riley at Nebraska. I think this is a very interesting matchup, but Mike Riley did not do a very good job when he was at Oregon State of beating Oregon. In fact, he was 4-10. So I believe that Oregon has the advantage of this game. I do believe that they'll win by a touchdown. Given that it's at Nebraska, this is going to make it a very interesting and close game, but I do expect Oregon to win by a touchdown.
I don't want to say a must-win, but I feel like this might be a must-win for Riley at Nebraska. He really, really struggled last year. He's 2-0, yes, this year. I'm saying I put him in the top 25, but if he doesn't win this game, it could be the beginning of another bad snowball effect. And if they don't finish above probably 8 wins at this point, he might be sitting in a pretty warm seat come December and January.
Absolutely.
So, Michael, we're going to move on. We've got 2 games left. We're going to move on. Michigan State at Notre Dame. This looks to be another fun game. Notre Dame played really well, bounced back well after that Texas game. Michigan State didn't look all that great in their first game of the season against an FCS opponent. A lot of mistakes, turnovers, but they have had a bye week to prepare for this.
Yeah, so I think a lot of people are very excited about this game. Ranking-wise, Notre Dame comes in at 18 and Michigan State at 12. I think Michigan State is slightly overrated. By comparison, compared to Ole Miss playing Florida State and challenging themselves early on in the season, Michigan State had a very easy first game with a bye week. I think there's a lot of fans of theirs that are concerned that they're going to get off to a slow start. I do believe that Notre Dame is going to win this by 10 points, which is going to outweigh they're currently favored by 8, so I think they're going to win the game straight up, and they're going to cover the 8 points. They found their quarterback in Deshaun Kaiser. He's been gaining confidence the last few games. I think this is going to be a big win for Notre Dame.
Our last game is Ohio State and Oklahoma, one of the most highly anticipated games coming into the season. Unfortunately, Oklahoma lost week 1, but Oklahoma seemed to bounce back well last week. I know it was against Louisiana Monroe, but they looked very good, scored a lot of points. Ohio State hasn't played any real competition yet. Struggled for about maybe a minute in each game, and then kind of ran away with it. Thumped Tulsa, I believe, like 48-3 last week, and they beat up on Bowling Green week 1, 66-20, maybe 66 to something like that. And I don't know what to take from this. Like, it's what we've been saying. It's too early in the season. Ohio State does have to travel. Oklahoma's been tested. Ohio State hasn't. I think it comes down to offensive line play, and if Baker Mayfield can make some plays, as well as Ohio State, do they control the ball, or do they have some errors and mistakes too? Because if they do, Oklahoma's probably going to capitalize on those. Michael, how about you start us off here?
Yeah, so this is an interesting game. I wrote down my notes for it and then crumpled up my paper and tossed it out because initially I was like, this is a sneaky game for Oklahoma. Like, I think Oklahoma is going to win this, and I listed all these reasons, and then I just came back to the point that it's Bob Stoops versus Urban Meyer. Like, just think about that for 2 seconds. Think about which guy is going to have his team best prepared to win the game. I get that it's on the road at Norman, but it's like, you think of this as an all-time, this is a playoff play-in game, especially for Oklahoma. I do believe that Ohio State is going to win this game after initially thinking that Oklahoma was going to win it. This is a very hard game for me to pick. OSU, again, is favored by 1.5. I do believe that they'll cover that, but again, Ohio State's untested to this point, but I do believe that they just have the better coach, and they're going to make the adjustments needed in order to beat Oklahoma on the road.
Yeah, man, that takes me back to the 2008 national championship, Florida against Oklahoma, when Urban Meyer was at Florida with Tim Tebow, and they beat Oklahoma in the national championship. That being said, I'm gonna take Ohio State as well, but we still have one more to hear from. So, Marcus, what do you have to say here?
You guys both hit on really great points. Ohio State does have the better coach, but Oklahoma has been tested. Unfortunately for Oklahoma, they failed that test. I don't know if it was necessarily they failed or if Houston was just that much better. But regardless, they lost in their test game. So does that mean that Oklahoma is, a top 15 team like they're ranked? Or should they be higher or should they be lower? Again, we've talked about polls. We don't know. So they both have positives and they both have negatives at this point. Ohio State hasn't really been challenged. The fact that it's in Oklahoma and Ohio State's still favored, it makes it hard to pick against Ohio State. Oklahoma's good. I think they could be the best team in the Big 12, or at least the top 3 teams in the Big 12. And I don't think Ohio State is the best team in the Big Ten. With that being said, this is a hard one for me, but I think I'd go with Ohio State, and it's going to be a close game. I would like to pick Oklahoma, and if Oklahoma does win, that just will push Houston into the top 5 if they win their game, obviously, because that just shows that Oklahoma is as good as they were projected to be, and if Houston beats them, or if Oklahoma beats Ohio State, Houston having beaten Oklahoma, that's just going to bump Houston and be top 5 team. But I think Ohio State's going to pull this one off.
So that wraps up our preview of the big games of the week. Only thing left is for us to talk about the upsets of the week. So let's talk about upsets real fast before we finish out this podcast. Marcus, we'll start with you.
Yeah, I said earlier that I like North Dakota State over Iowa. I know you chastised me for that one. I kind of chastised.
Continue.
I chastised myself in my mind as I said it. I just, I like the underdog. I like the small guy, but I like seeing the small guy beat the big guy. I've always liked that, and so that's why I like North Dakota State. I think Iowa still will win this, but I think it's a possibility. I also like, and this is probably my Boise State fandom coming through, but I like Cincinnati over Houston. Houston is great. I think they could be top 5 team, like I said. But in-conference games are always tough. Boise State can beat anyone outside of the conference, but when it gets in conference, it's often a challenge. I think the same goes for Houston. I think Cincinnati is going to be a great test for them. Not quite an Oklahoma test, but I think it's going to be a great test. And it's in Cincinnati, which gives them, a little bit of added benefit. But like I said earlier, I don't know if they can stop Greg Ward Jr. If they can, Cincinnati can win. So I'm going to go kind of long shots, but Cincinnati over Houston and North Dakota State over Iowa.
Cincinnati has a 58% chance to win that game. Michael, how about we move on to you? Give us your upsets of the week.
So my upset of the week is going to be Texas A&M playing at Auburn. I believe Auburn's going to win this game. Auburn's actually favored by 3.5 points, so I don't know how much of a true upset this actually is, except for the fact that Texas A&M is ranked inside the top 20. But I actually think that this is going to be the victory for Auburn that validates what Clemson did on the road in the first game of the season. Jordan Hare Stadium it's very difficult for anybody to come in and win. And Texas A&M, I get that they beat UCLA, but I'm still not completely sold on them being inside the top 20. So I'm going to pick Auburn to win this game at home.
Interesting pick. I'm sitting here looking at 3, and it's hard for me to pick. As I said, I wasn't going to talk about the game. I'm going to say Louisville wins that game. They're 2-point dogs, but I think Louisville at home wins it probably by about a field goal. Looking outside, there's 2 other games here. One is Pittsburgh, -6, traveling to Oklahoma State. And there's 2 ways this game goes. Either Oklahoma State struggles like they did last week, or they're pissed about the way that the last game ended on an untimed down that shouldn't have happened and that took away their perfect undefeated season. So either Pittsburgh comes in and catches Oklahoma State feeling sorry for themselves, or Oklahoma State gets back on track and just goes out and starts kicking butt. But I'm going to take Pittsburgh. I think they're a pretty good team going on the road, and I think Oklahoma State's going to still be feeling a little sorry for themselves. My favorite one is East Carolina, who was now won 6 consecutive games against the ACC, last week beating North Carolina State. This week, they're playing another Carolina, but it's the SEC from the South. They're playing South Carolina. South Carolina is favored by 3. I've not been too impressed with the way South Carolina has been playing, and East Carolina looked really good. I'm going to take East Carolina +3 to win that game.
I actually really like that pick. East Carolina, purple and gold. My Lakers are purple and gold, so you always got to go with them. But no, I think South Carolina's been kind of weak the last few years, and East Carolina, like you said, has shown tremendous ability to fight with the big dogs. And this is a pretty, it's not necessarily a huge rivalry, but I do believe it is a rivalry of some extent. And I actually agree with you. I think East Carolina is going to take this one.
No, battle for the Carolinas.
Yeah.
Well, there's a lot of really, really good games this week. I hope you guys enjoyed the podcast, but even more so, go enjoy the Thursday through Saturday. And the NFL is back. We had games last week, and so maybe we'll get out an NFL podcast here in the next couple of days. We'll see if we can get that going. If not, it might be a couple weeks. Enjoy the weekend. Michael's over there already talking about his Chiefs, but hey, how about them Pats going on the road without like 6 players and winning? Anyways, we will talk with you guys soon. Have a good weekend and enjoy some football.